Coming to you from a humble newsroom on the back lot of yesteryear. Yesterday's news today. Recorded with the highest fidelity instruments that were on sale on Amazon. You will hear the most fascinating and terrific stories of our time. It's hard to know what to believe in this ever-changing world, but you can be certain to receive just the facts from our trusted newsmen. Here he is, Jonathan T. McMalley.
Hello, and welcome to a new beginning for yesterday's news, today. Over the past couple weeks, we have had several staff meetings with our team, and have discovered that our current model of coverage is unfortunately unsustainable. In my efforts to create an objective show that gave just the facts, I was working our small crew toward emotional and mental breakdowns for which I should potentially apologize. In an effort to cover the news, it is possible that we were forced to overlook some nuance with some of our heavier topics. With this said, the show will now be a bit more focused on a few larger stories each week as opposed to all that may have happened. We hope this new format does not detract from our initial goal, and that it only allows us to give more in-depth looks at the most important stories of each week. It may not be the show that I first intended, but it most certainly is what it is. And now, on with our show. This week's top story involves barrister Jeffrey Nice, a lawyer based in the United Kingdom, who announced an independent tribunal investigating human rights violations by the Chinese government in Xinjiang over mass incarceration and potential genocide of Uyghur Muslims. This comes after months of international public outcry for a resolution to the situation, which has allegedly been ongoing since 2017. According to an investigative report done by the Associated Press, forced intrauterine devices, sterilization, and abortions have been utilized by the Chinese government to cut the number of Uyghur births down. In 2014, Chinese President Xi Jinping visited Xinjiang and reportedly said it was time to implement, quote, equal family planning policies for all ethnicities, a controversial stance that China has been known for to curb its overpopulation problems. This was supported by Chen Quanguo when he was appointed as Communist Party Secretary of Xinjiang in 2016. Upon further investigation, it seems the Uyghur Muslim population has taken the brunt of such policies and are punished more often and more severely than secular-leaning Han Chinese. These punishments are arguably the brainchild of Quanguo, who has spearheaded similar social policies in order to shift Tibet into a police state. One such punishment commonly implemented is incarceration in a re-education center, forcing families to separate for an often uncertain amount of time. Within these re-education centers, it is reported that Uyghur Muslims are forced to undergo various forms of forced labor, communist education, and even torture, in order to force a change in their views and culture. It is said that release is granted when a person is deemed, quote, ideologically healthy. While incarcerated in such centers, orphaned Uyghur children are reportedly left to their own devices, meaning they aren't put into government care and are barred from being cared for by other Uyghur Muslims. This has led to starvation and death by hypothermia, disease, and malnutrition of these children, further adding to the staggering number of lost Uyghur Muslims. When challenged by the international community that this treatment met the United Nations definition of genocide, the Chinese government responded by claiming the camps were teaching valuable job skills to the Uyghur Muslims and are no way meant to destroy their culture and alter their beliefs. While this story has been absent from the regular news cycle, people around the world have taken to the streets to protest these clear human rights violations. On August 28th, a handful of like-minded individuals in Washington and New York City staged a peaceful protest, calling on the U.S. government as well as the United Nations to officially recognize the abuse of the Uyghur Muslims by the Chinese government as genocide. This date was to coincide with the 4-year anniversary of Chen Quanguo's appointment. It seems the call to world governments has been heard by some nations, as Malaysia came out this past week, stating that they would not extradite Uyghur refugees under any circumstance, instead offering safe passage through to another country if requested. Protesters have also called to boycott Apple and Nike products, alleging that their suppliers had ties to forced Uyghur labor. Disney has been under fire for filming in the Xinjiang region, going so far as to thank the two parties responsible for the mass re-education of Uyghur Muslims in the credits for the live-action adaptation of Mulan. This is following previous controversies wherein Liu Yifei, the actress playing the title character of the film, supported Hong Kong's police crackdown on pro-democracy protests. These together have led to large campaigns on social media to #boycott Mulan. At this point, at the behest of my colleagues, we will only be giving a brief overview of some of the other events happening in the world today. Across the nation, solemn events were held in memoriam of the 19th anniversary of the terror attacks of September 11th, 2001. Many of these were altered for the safety of participants in regards to coronavirus, as exemplified when former and current Vice Presidents Joe Biden and Mike Pence bumped elbows in greeting at a memorial service in New York City. The day is not without controversy, as a report by New York Daily News revealed that the Trump administration siphoned $4 million from the NYC Fire Department Fund for September 11th first responders. This was established to provide health care to those who suffered illnesses from inhalation of dust and smoke at Ground Zero. The U.S. Treasury says this money was diverted to cover delinquent debt owed from the city to the federal government. Fires still rage in the western U.S., leading to eerie crimson skies. In Oregon and California, damages are being measured at over 750,000 acres. This week, federal courts ruled that Florida residents with felony convictions must pay fines before voting. Critics have likened this to a poll tax. Citigroup made history this week by naming Jane Fraser as its CEO, making her the first woman to ever lead a major U.S. bank. While there are currently a record number of women leading Fortune 500 companies, they still only account for 10% of these CEOs. Finally, Bahrain and Israel agreed to establish diplomatic relations. President Trump has been championing his Middle East peace plan, voicing his excitement with the, quote, second Arab country to make peace with Israel in 30 days, end quote. So ends our short stories of the week. And now, a word from our sponsors. Or so I'd like to believe.
You're right to be skeptical, Jonathan, for this week, once again, we have no one to sponsor our lovely little radio show. But we do indeed have something very real to advertise. As you may have noticed from our lead newsman's dejected tone, we've changed things up a little here at Yesterday's News Today. We are covering a few fewer stories these days, but that doesn't mean we don't have our finger to the pulse of the goings-ons and happenings that are going on and happening. If you are craving just that little bit more, you are in luck. You see, all the fine people you hear today are also discussing current events on the information superhighway. And you can listen in, or rather read in. You just have to tune your Twitter to @RadioYNT. That's A in a circle, Radio YNT. And our fantastic newsman, Jonathan T. McNally, is overjoyed to share his tweets with you.
I don't like the term tweets. It sounds quite silly.
That's what the kids are calling it these days.
I'd much rather chirp than tweet.
Chirp?
Yes, chirp. I wish to chirp, not tweet.
You're right. Chirp sounds much less silly.
Chirp it is. I shall be chirping the news directly to you, dear audience.
Whatever works for you, sir. And again, that's Radio YNT. And back to you, Jonathan.
I believe that brings us to our most necessary of segments, Strangely True Local News. If I'm being perfectly honest, this first story leaves me somewhat befuddled, as last week we reported on goats attacking a police car in the UK. This week, a similar instance occurred in Douglas County, Georgia. An unnamed sheriff's deputy returned to her cruiser to find a goat on her front seat eating her paperwork. The animal then headbutted the deputy's knees and fled the scene. The deputy was not seriously injured, but we will continue to report on this concerning trend. Our next story is out of Albuquerque, New Mexico, where something altogether different was on the run. A portable toilet was recorded journeying down historic Route 66. No injuries were reported, though it is unclear if anyone was inside the rolling runaway commode. The traveling John was shared across social media, with one person scoring the footage with Kansas's "Dust in the Wind," and many others saying it was quite symbolic of the year 2020. An English couple, rather, is making the most of the challenging year. Romani and Sam Rando Smith had planned their wedding for July, but it was postponed due to coronavirus. When finally they could have their ceremony, rules in England forbade weddings with more than 30 people. With a guest list of 100, Romani and Sam decided to have their friends attend in more than spirit, and spent the equivalent of $2,000 in American money to have cardboard cutouts of all their friends made for the ceremony. They say the cost was similar to if they had attended, but they certainly saved on the cost of alcohol. Hello there.
Hi, Mr. McGalley, sir. Is it time for me yet?
I'm not sure.
Oh, fiddle-faddle. I didn't come in too early, did I?
I was just finishing up.
Oh, good. I have so much to talk about.
I can see that. What is all that?
Just my research.
And what have you been researching for?
Conspiracy Corner with Archie the Debunker.
Well, that mostly.
So it is. Carry on then, young man.
All right. So, let us begin with the protests that have been happening all over these United States. When I mention them, what images cross your mind? Shattered glass and fires in the streets. Altercations with police. Violence, destruction. Riots, disorder, unrest. But what if I was to tell you that's not what's actually happening? I mean, it is, but not as much as you might think. The Armed Conflict Location and Event Data Project, commonly called ACLID, has been a reliable source for information on violent conflicts around the world. With the protests occurring throughout the country over this past year, they turned their analysis on events within our borders. Their research documented 7,750 demonstrations related to the Black Lives Matter movement, occurring between May 26th and August 22nd. Of these, 93% were determined to be nonviolent, and their threshold for what they considered violent was fairly all-encompassing. They defined violence to include not only fighting between protesters and police, or looting and vandalism, but also acts like blocking roads using barricades, burning tires, and the toppling of statues of colonial figures, slave owners, and Confederate leaders. Where these acts did occur, ACLID found that they were largely confined to specific blocks. So, why is it that you might believe that there is widespread violence plaguing the streets of cities across the country? Truth is, you're not alone. A recent Morning Consult poll discovered that 42% of respondents believe most protesters associated with the Black Lives Matter movement are trying to incite violence or destroy property. The question is this some vast conspiracy? An intricate plan by some secret cabal that has gripped our leadership and media outlets? Is there a coordinated effort to discredit these protests as a whole? I mean, not exactly. As to the media, it is very much them just doing what they do. There is the age-old phrase in news coverage, if it bleeds, it leads. And that's very much what is happening here. Whether in television commercials, newspaper covers, or shared article thumbnails, pictures of fiery streets and fights are more attention-grabbing. Media outlets require engagement for advertisements to make money, so when it comes to covering protests, news sources may find little reason to cover another peaceful day of chants and marches. but see all the reason to cover the reportedly rare, violent night of riots. And as a validity effect, the more that individuals see these graphic displays, the more they are likely to interpret them as representative of the whole protest. So when it falls to the Trump administration, their interpretation of this imagery is not necessarily nefarious, but simply seeking the advantageous. The president and his party members have long touted themselves as upholders of law and order, and they can use the more violent images at the protest to gain favorability within their political base. Footage of fires, looting, and fighting can be troubling to some viewers, and politicians may appear much more electable when claiming to defend against such unrest. For better or worse, that is politics as usual. There is a troubling side to all this, though, as the public's conception to Black Lives Matter demonstrations has had further ramifications. The ACLED report went on to say that despite the majority of protests remaining peaceful, there was a disproportionate trend of violence arising from government forces and non-state actors. They found that authorities were more likely to intervene in BLM protests than any other demonstration, and often used force, including tear gas, rubber bullets, pepper spray, and batons. These crackdowns by authorities have been found to not promote peace, but rather aggravate tensions in cities. On top of this, militias and counter-protesters have also become much more active and assertive in reaction to the violent narrative. The ACLED report notes the increase of armed individuals at protests, and that of 360 counter-protests, 43 have turned violent. In sum, there is unfortunately no vast conspiracy to rewrite the story of Black Lives Matter protests in the United States. But there are those that are taking advantage of the situation. And as media outlets and politicians reap the benefits of a false narrative about the nature of demonstrations against police violence, they are indeed building a world where more violence is bound to take place. And that is the truth of the matter. Thank you, Jonathan. Mr. McNally, sir.
That was actually fairly well done, Archie.
Really? You really liked it?
Yes. Trust me, you are no more surprised than I am.
Thank you, sir. I can't wait for the next one.
I am anticipating that as well. And now for what everyone has been waiting for, the return of our entertainment section with our entertainment reporter. Bruce?
I'm not sure that I can do this week's segment.
And why is that, Bruce?
I'm tired. I'm really very tired.
We just had a break. A week off. You should be well rested and ready to go.
You'd think that, but I'm not sure that I can keep doing this.
Oh, well, that is quite unfortunate. Well, I suppose that ends this week's show.
It's just exhausting doing this every week. The very nature of this entertainment industry is so very draining.
Ah, this is the segment. Carry on then, Bruce.
All across the media landscape, many have been taking a break, whether they like it or not. When coronavirus overtook the world, television, movies, live events, and many news outlets had to shut down in part or entirely, unable to safely operate. As the virus persists, Hollywood is looking for ways to feasibly renew productions that have long been halted. An indefinite hiatus is no longer financially viable, and producers and media creators have since been brainstorming a complete reinvention of the industry to make it safer in a pandemic. And from the productions that have started, there are many promising plans in place. It sounds like the goal is to truly take the virus seriously. Social distancing, masks, testing, sanitation, the whole gamut is being proposed and utilized. But perhaps the changes should not stop there. A think piece by Zach Arnold, ACE, a Hollywood editor of shows including Cobra Kai and Glee, decries many of the issues within the current apparatus of filmmaking. His article entitled, "Dear Hollywood, We Don't Want to Go Back to Normal," notes that the incredible pace within the entertainment industry is often unsustainable for the individuals working within it. He describes long hours without breaks, people working under and unpaid, bullying, and unsafely short turnarounds where employees get little to no sleep. He tells of accepted but troubling practices, unspoken traditions, and mores that lead to poor quality of life for entertainment workers, and various systemic issues as revealed with the #MeToo movement. A prime example of this can be seen with recent reports about the Ellen DeGeneres Show. In July, BuzzFeed published a report depicting the Ellen Show as a toxic work environment. There were anecdotal accounts of bullying and harassment, including alleged racism and sexual propositioning by the show's executive producers. The report states that those who attempted to make positive change were often ostracized and silenced. Since these developments, several producers have left the show, and Warner Media has begun an internal investigation. Meanwhile, the titular star of the show has said that she was largely kept unaware of these problems. This was all happening while the show itself kept an impressive on-air facade of happiness and positivity. And they are not alone. The final product that you see each day isn't always the way it was. Just because you see happy personalities in your shows and their interviews doesn't mean that that is an accurate representation of the conditions their employees go through. Even here, we have our problems. Certain members of our staff can be demanding and dismissive. Denberg, roll the clips.
Are we really quite certain that Archie is the best fit for this show? He seems a bit of an odd one.
Why don't you ask him yourself?
Oh, hello there. Archie, I didn't see you there. So glad you've joined us.
We'll have someone else cover this one.
Like who? Bruce? He barely ever gets his writing completed on time.
Forgive me, Jonathan. I have sciatica.
How does that... Could someone please get me a coffee?
Get it yourself.
I'm in the middle of something. Denberg, I'm still not sure what your purpose is here. Could you...
Me neither, sir. Me neither.
That last episode was an inferior product. I'm sorry. We seem to have lost our focus. And I am going to need all of you to improve upon the work that you are doing.
Jonathan, truly, we are all working as hard as we can. But this is unsustainable. There's just too much news for this small team.
Is that how everyone feels?
I'm just happy to be here.
I'm tired. I'm really very tired.
We just had a break. A week off. You should be well rested.
So, as we all return from our breaks, it might be exhausting to find that we are returning to much the same place that we left. The point is one brought up in the article by Mr. Arnold. For so long, the entertainment industry has lived by the mantra, the show must go on. But, as COVID-19 has brought everything screeching to a halt, maybe now is the perfect time for the industry to reevaluate how things are done. Maybe we can all find a happier, healthier, safer way for all of us to make the things that bring joy to so many others. And that is all. Back to you, Jonathan.
I apologize, Bruce. Everyone. And thank you for making me aware of some of the things we can improve upon here at Yesterday's News today. Maybe for too long we have been simply saying that it is what it is. And to our audience, thank you all for joining us. And good night.
This program was written and performed by Roger J. Thacher and Dennis Shanaberg. You are encouraged to obtain a subscription to this broadcast with the simple selection of a button below. Furthermore, you can indicate your appreciation by giving us the old thumbs up. Be sure to tune in next week to hear tomorrow's news of yesterday, then.